Welcome to the Style Free Podcast, where a father and son detail and digress on a wide variety of topics within music, art, family, and culture. Your hosts are Professor Stephen J. Tyson Sr. and Jr., also known as Dad and Papo. In today's episode, we discuss me, Steve Tyson Jr., also known as Ellect, musician, educator, and documentarian. In a style-free exclusive, we'll have a deep father and son conversation about my musical journey, as well as my life's journey thus far, with stories from my childhood and college to my experiences and over 20 years working in education, all the way up to owning an independent record label in 2022. Tune in, because if you've been a part of my journey, you might end up hearing your name dropped.
So it's good to be back with you, Papo.
Yeah, likewise. Glad to be in another episode of Style Free.
I thought it'd be interesting for us to talk about you as an artist. We talk a lot about music, and you certainly have grown up with a lot of music in your own life. And I was wondering if you could maybe start out by telling us, when did you really first feel music as, an important part of your life? What was the kind of context in which you grew up where, music had a presence, whether it was church or in the home or with friends? When did it really come into your consciousness?
It was definitely the home first. With you and mom always having some music going at some point throughout the day. It was really cool. So I was able to get a lot of your musical tastes and mom's musical tastes. I mean, even the car rides that we would take traveling to grandma's house or whenever we would go to Pittsburgh or something like that. Every car ride, one of you two was singing lead, the other was singing the backup harmonies and the ad libs. And it was just always a little mini family concert in the car, with just folks having fun and enjoying music. And then once obviously dating myself a bit, but once I got my Walkman and was able to have my own cassettes and listen to my own music, that really, I was really immersed into that. I used to always have this emotional and imaginative connection with music.
For example, that's really interesting the way you describe that.
Yeah, I mean, it's because as a kid, I always recognized how music made me feel and how different songs made me feel different emotions, whether it was, sometimes it was the lyrics, but as I've gotten older and reflected on it, I realized that it's the song composition and the structure of the music itself, almost regardless of what the lyrics are. I mean, there's definitely songs that have, been inspiring for me. I think tuning into lyrics is what got me really into hip hop, but the melody and the emotion that can be created through different chord progressions and just song structures, I didn't have the language or the understanding of what it was, but I definitely recognized how it was affecting me as a little kid. And so if it was, children, even children's songs, the theme song to Land Before Time, or that song as a little kid used to make me cry with emotion, or listening to Sesame Street and hearing Big Bird and Kermit sing songs would make me laugh, or even make me emotional at times too. It's Not So Easy Being Green is a song that helps kids, at least for me, get a better understanding of some of the emotions and things that they're going through. And so I always connected with a lot of just how music made me feel, and, whether it was, being excited or, dancing, around the house, or if it was making me think, or if it was making me feel certain emotions, I was always tuned into that. And then especially in the church too. So, I mean, so the context around a lot of this is also informed by where we lived when I was growing up also. And so because we lived in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which was not ethnically or culturally diverse until I was, the only place I saw people of color was really in the church, if it wasn't for folks in my family. And so
it's not easy being green.
Yeah, and it wasn't easy being black either. Like,
Yeah.
so so it was really interesting how I saw how music manifested itself inside of the church, and how whether it was the choir director or the music director, and how they would work back and forth with one another to switch the emotion of different songs, or the cadence of different songs, from one part of the program to the next, and how musically there was a journey in going to church every Sunday.
That's really interesting. You should mention that, because I think we should also mention that because I came from a Catholic background. Mm-hmm. Your mother came from a Baptist background, but we tended to go to the Baptist church. Right?
A bit more so, yeah. And I appreciated the Catholic Church too. I very easily recognized the differences between being at a Black Baptist church and a predominantly white Catholic church. And the music was, I think, the most striking thing for me. I mean, there was the force of the choir at the Baptist church, and it's St. James Missionary Baptist Church is the church that we went to, and then the Catholic church that we would go to was St. Rochus. And at St. James, that choir was a force, and at least that's how it hit me. Like, I don't know what the quality of or caliber of that choir is through my adult lens and the experiences that I've had just growing up and meeting and listening to various singers and choirs. But for my limited experience as a child and what it did for me, it really hit home. And so it was even more than just like the voices in the choir, but the way the drummer was attacking the drums and the bassist, and how he would just put some pop and some funk inside of all of these spiritual songs. I was like, man, this is incredible. And then we would go to St. Rochus, and it would be predominantly guitar, acoustic guitar and hand claps with a little piano. Yeah. Which
might
was
have been
cool.
or an organ or something.
Yeah. And it was cool. It was cool. Definitely. But it was,
the energy
I just noticed
was different, the difference.
Right? Very much so. The energy was definitely different.
Yeah.
But the harmonies at the Catholic Church really struck me in the way that they would sing like, Jesus, Lord of Lord, you take away the sins of the world, and have all the other people singing in different harmonies behind them. Like, I was like, wow, like, especially when they hit that have mercy on us, I was like, ooh, like they nailed that. And so like, that would be my favorite part of going to the Catholic Church, was listening to how they would do the music, but then also getting that little wafer, that host and stuff, because we didn't get that like that as often as at the Baptist church. Right, the body of Christ.
Yes. So early on, like you say, in the church was very important in terms of the music, the energy, the way in which the arrangements, the vocal arrangements, the attack in terms of the musical instruments, as well as the human voice itself. And the harmonies. Now, you also mentioned something about, growing up in the house. Is there any music that you can think of that maybe your mother or I played that had an impression on you at an early age that kind of stayed with you?
Yes, there's definitely individuals, like musicians and groups, that had an impact on me as a kid. Michael Jackson, Earth, Wind and Fire, all of the Motown catalog, so much of that. But I think what really stuck to me the most was how I would see you and Mom interacting with the music. And
what do you mean?
So with Mom, it was, we're driving in the car and she's always singing along to every single song, just unabashed, as though nobody can see. And, she's singing just with pure joy and freedom. And I'd be in the backseat of the car bopping along and singing along too. And her taste in music was really diverse and different too, which I appreciated. And I would say different as far as what somebody would expect maybe of a, Black woman in the 80s and 90s, where she's listening to a lot of Carole King and
The Eagles, America.
yeah, Eagles, Chicago. Let's see what else. Steely Dan, Boz Scaggs. It was really cool hearing music that my mom would enjoy that was just different than what I expected a black person to enjoy, because growing up in a place like Johnstown, socially and externally, there was a lot of a narrative around what a black person could or couldn't be. And so, if I had any interest in like hip hop, then I would try to bring a song to my friends or into school or to after school at all. They would be like, "No, you can't listen to that, or that's bad. You can't play that. It's rap music. That's terrible." And it would be like the clean version of a Coolio song. Like, it was ridiculous with the type of reactions that they would have. And it's not to say that mom only listened to like, 80s soft rock or, folk or anything like that, but listening to Paul McCartney and Wings, like I can't hear a single Wings song without thinking of driving in the car with mom in her little yellow Toyota Tercel all through Johnstown. Like that, any Paul McCartney Wings song makes me think of driving around with her. And so with you, being a visual artist and the type of artist that you are, where you're informed so much by music and your connection interactions with it, especially as you mentioned during season 1 of Style Free, I think it was in the James Brown episode. In that episode, you talk about having a synesthesia experience where you're seeing certain colors and how
I was talking about James Brown, right?
Yeah.
And I said that it was the first time when I closed my eyes, I could imagine seeing colors, shapes, angular shapes, and silver and blue, and I think I said white and black. Those are the things that came to mind. And then years later, I translated that into a painting called Corner to Corner, which was a fusion of that experience, listening to Herbie Hancock's Future to Future, and applying my dot patterns, which became sort of a signature style by that time. So early on, you had all of these experiences, but you also, most of the music that I think that your friends were listening to at that time, as I think you alluded to, was not largely rap or hip hop. What was some of the music that you were hearing in your environment at that time? And
to be honest with you, I couldn't tell you. I had no idea what any of my friends were listening to growing up, because I don't know if even they were really listening to music like that. Like I'm really like going back and reflecting on some of my friends. Like I remember my one friend Brandon, he had a Boys to Men CD, the 2 album, and my friend Ricky, he had the TLC Crazy Sexy Cool album. But and those are the only 2 examples I can ever think of my friends having any type of music when I was growing up. They were much more into sports and video games, which I was definitely into as well. And that's where we connected, was through sports and video games. But
interesting. Wow.
We never really had any connections through music. My musical connections and how much that informed and inspired me came from predominantly you and mom. Yeah.
And then, of course, I was used to being from New York and loving the music that I used to enjoy in New York, which was in general kind of eclectic, but I tended to gravitate toward, R&B, jazz, and so forth. So there was a time where we were able to travel to New York and visit WBLS.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. I was, like 10, 9.
Yeah.
I might have been younger than that. But when it comes to those radio stations and those DJs, how they influenced me was through the mixtapes that you would make, recording those radio programs. And that was really my first then experience actually connecting and listening to hip hop, because we didn't have any of those stations in Johnstown. So those cassette tapes that you had of those recordings from WBLS and all of these stations that were playing black music, I was like completely enthralled with. Like, I absolutely loved it whenever you played those tapes, or I'd ask you, Dad, can you play this? And you know, it'd be a lot of cool stuff like Public Enemy and everything like that. But I would also even want, you know, some of the novelty songs like Biz Marquis, Pickin' Boogers, you know, like,
You remember that?
and so like, it wouldn't matter. Like, as long as it was hip hop, like, I was like, wow, like, this is cool. And so, and at the same time, Yo MTV Raps was just getting onto TV and then ending up having its multi-year run. And so as a little kid, I was definitely inspired and informed by the music that you and Mom would play and the music that I would hear in the churches. But it wasn't until I got a hold of those mixtapes from those radio stations and then tuning into Yo MTV Raps where I actually had my first real connections and my own tangible moment of being like, yeah, like, this is something that I want to do. And I want to be like these guys that I see on the TV or that I'm hearing their music on the radio. Like,
and that's the point, because you saw them,
yeah,
and you saw something reflected back at you in a way that in the cultural environment where you were growing up, for the most part, you didn't see. Certainly not in terms of entertainers or, you know, people who were doing rap or, you know, that sort of thing in the community.
And even beyond that, just people in general. The only Black teenagers I saw as a kid growing up were some of the handful of kids that were in the church.
Yeah.
And as a 7, 8, 9-year-old, I'm not allowed to go hang out with the 13, 14, 16, 17-year-olds. And they're not wanting me to kick it with them like that anyway. So if I'm only on one day a week for 3 hours, because it was a long service, for 3 hours that Sunday is my only, you know, somewhat proximate connection to young Black kids, then what's going to inform me is where else am I going to see young Black kids? It's going to be these young rappers and entertainers that are on Yo MTV Raps. None of my friends were watching Yo MTV Raps, that's for sure.
Yeah. No, that's for sure. And also, you know, you have to think back that a lot of these young folks, for them, you were their first exposure to a Black person, you know, as a friend, you know, in terms of your family, you know. And so you were projecting to them, and our family was projecting to them, you know, an image that maybe in some ways broke certain stereotypes or preconceived notions, you know. So there was a learning process there. But at the same time, I know that there were also a lot of pressures on you, as we talked before about, you know, jokingly, you know, it's not easy being green. But I think that, you know, this idea of feeling that you know, where you don't have anything that sort of reflects back to you, something that recognizes your value, you know, as a person, you know, the culture that of which you are a part, is sometimes, it can feel kind of lonely or isolated in certain ways. And there's no question that there are very many fine people in that community, right? But going back to New York, as we would travel back to New York every now and then, seeing family, or as well as Philadelphia, I think was sort of a healthy antidote to feeling isolated, you know, in this environment. And the music was a vehicle for you to connect with something, to transcend the limitations of the environment in which you lived. And I think that you embraced that in a big way. And I think that through your own spirit, your own intelligence, your own need to express itself, express yourself, I think that was the model for you. And through that, you began to recognize the importance of a lot of different things. One, you started listening to people like KRS-One. You started listening to people like Chuck D and Public Enemy. You started listening to even some of the women like Queen Latifah, you know, and Ladies First. You know, the list goes on and on and on in terms, I'm talking about those formative years in the early years. Michael Jackson as a star entertainer, you know, his music. And you, like many other people. You know, you grab that hairbrush or whatever it was.
Yep.
Started doing your spins and turning around and all
it's
of
funny.
that.
You mentioned Michael Jackson too. Like, I mean, he was definitely major influence. I mean, he was the biggest artist in the world at the time I was growing up. But also, it was when I started to realize that music was a business. Was whenever I learned about My Jack Music and MJJ Records, and you had told me about both of those entities, and I was, like 8 years old, learning that an artist can actually have a business end of their career in addition to the entertaining side. And that was just really cool. Where then I'm a little kid thinking like, oh, like one day can I get signed to MJJ Records and be an artist on there? And I'm seeing, Tevin Campbell working with Prince. So
yes,
one day what it will be like for me one day, that having those, little kid ambitions and stuff.
Yes.
Even though I wasn't really having any formal musical training besides piano lessons at the music shop in the mall. So I had these ambitions and these ideas of, oh man, like music and musical expression is the place and space for me as a human being and hopefully in my career. But yet the opportunities to immerse myself in that were really limited, whether that was by circumstance to where we lived or circumstance of our income at the time as a family. But my only musical outlets were piano lessons and then eventually school band, where I ended up playing the trumpet.
First trumpet, first chair.
Right? I worked my way there. But
yeah.
But
we even had an encounter with John Faddis.
Yeah.
At the Blue Note.
Yep.
With Milt Jackson and some other when we went down there with your grandfather.
Yeah.
And he offered you lessons too.
Right.
Which I reminded him of a few years ago.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, at that point it was irrelevant. but yeah, there was a lot of opportunities that then also weren't capitalized. I mean, I'm a 9-year-old kid. I can't capitalize on the opportunity of connecting with John Faddis, but
I wonder if something that maybe shifted a little bit. You remember we went to see that movie.
You're bringing up. Yeah, but you're also conflating two different experiences in time. So we saw.
You were younger, right? You were like.
Yeah. We saw Mo Better Blues when I was like 5 years old, and Denzel gets clocked with the trumpet, and with his own trumpet in that movie, and that scared the bejesus out of me as a kid.
No, that was
But then at the same time, I went and grew up and played trumpet. I grew up. I say grew up, but a few years later, I end up playing trumpet. Now, trumpet wasn't my first choice. I wanted to play drums and I wanted to play saxophone, but here we are. I end up at trumpet, and so like that's the thing. Like we were really just, and I say we. I mean, I'm only a kid, so I don't have agency in the decisions that are made for me in the schoolhouse and with professionals like John Faddis. But with the opportunities that I am aware of as far as what we were presented, school band and piano lessons at the mall weren't gonna get me to where I wanted to be. So by the time I become a teenager and then I start to learn about how all these rap songs I love are being produced, it's like, that's great. Where do I go to learn how to do that? Or who can I connect with to learn how to do that? And there was nobody in Johnstown, Pennsylvania that at least I was aware of to be connected with. And then we moved to Clifton Park, New York, and there was limited opportunity up there as well. And so even what I was experiencing as a young trumpet player, that also got the plug pulled on it when we moved to Clifton Park, because I go to a new school in a new district and they say, oh, we already have enough trumpets, but you can play French horn or tuba. And I was like, I don't play French horn or tuba and don't want to play French horn or tuba. And they said, well, then you don't have a space in this band. And that
Mm.
was the end of me ever taking any formal music lessons for the remainder of my high school career
Yeah.
until I end up doing African drumming when I'm in college.
Hmm. Hmm. So when did let's go back a little bit. So who were some of the earlier rappers? I know I mentioned a couple of names there, but who was really catching your ear, as you started becoming more exposed to, hip hop and rap?
Definitely KRS-One, Chuck D, Rakim, and Will Smith.
Mm.
Those are the four.
Yeah.
And, people be like, Will Smith, right at the end of that. It's like, hey, Will was the biggest rapper of the late 80s
That's right. Nope.
before Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And yeah,
Getting
he might
jiggy
not
with it.
be as lyrically skilled as the other folks that I was being informed by as a kid, but he was in the picture and
He was
somebody
huge.
that I appreciated. Parents Just Don't Understand,
Hmm.
Summertime, all that. Like, I loved those albums as a kid. He's the DJ, I'm the Rapper. I loved that album.
Hmm.
And then whenever they started progressing and they did Boom Shake the Room, I used to love that song when I
Oh
was a
yeah.
kid.
Yes.
And then things, obviously went into the shiny suit era with Getting Jiggy with It and Miami. And then after that, it's just things that connect to soundtracks, Men in
Mm-hmm.
Black and Wild Wild West and all that other stuff. So by that time, and then by that point, Will was not informing my lyricism.
Hmm.
But as a kid, in my earliest memories, it was definitely KRS, Chuck D, Rakim, and Will Smith. Or
You
I
know
guess
what's
I would say the Fresh Prince.
what's a common denominator, it seems, of all of those people that you identified is that, by and large, you don't really hear much cursing.
Well, I think that's also because of you. You weren't letting me listen to everything else that I was also intrigued by. Like, it took, when Outkast came out with Southern Playlistic Cadillac Music, I had seen Plays Ball on Yo MTV Raps, and I'd seen the interview with Fab, pulling up to their house, and I'm like, wow, these dudes seem so cool. Like, they're recorded in their house, like in their basement, and they're making this music. Like, this is incredible. And the album drops, and you're like, it
Yeah.
wasn't one that ended up in my cassette player.
Well,
When Biggie dropped Ready to Die, I was 9 years old, and I remember we were at the college that y'all taught at, that you and Mom were working at University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown, and there was a student. It was like the Black Student Union cookout or something like that, and you, me, and Mom were there, and somebody showed up and was all excited because they're like, yo, I got the new Biggie CD. I got the new Biggie CD. And they started playing the Ready to Die album. And I'm sitting there at 9 years old with a bunch of 19 and 20-year-old college kids. And we're all, for the first time together, listening to Ready to Die. And I'm like, yo, this is awesome. And by the time even track 2 comes around, you walk up and you're like, nope. And pick me. Like,
ready to die, ready to leave.
Yeah. And I was like, come on, like, what's going on? So some of the opportunity to be informed by other lyricists beyond just KRS, and because even Nas, there was like a little bit of hesitation with letting me listen to him. Like, so a lot of those other folks that grew to inform me, when I, turned 12, 13, 14, I could have been exposed to at 9 and 10, but, that was just delayed a bit due to parental restrictions. So.
Yeah. But, I also recognize the fact that, growing up, listening to music, for the most part, listening to Motown and, all the things that inform me, even James Brown, cursing wasn't necessary to get your point across. Cursing wasn't necessary in order to create a certain kind of energy, to get people moving and dancing and a certain sense of freedom or release. I'm not saying that it doesn't have its place. I'm just saying that it seemed to demonstrate that it wasn't, let's put it this way, listening to the sound of Philadelphia, talk about understand while you dance, right? So the words, the lyrics mean something. And some people can be listening to music, and the lyrics can be telling them things that are, whether they're misogynistic, whether they're racist, whether they're, it could be any number of things that in general we might consider to be, negative or kind of poisonous to consciousness. And so, so I took that ethos, and I felt that it was important that if you're going to listen to something, you ought to listen to something that doesn't put things in your head while you're shaking your behind, and that goes counter to the values that your mother and I, wanted to instill, in you. But those were important values that I thought it was important that we established early on. Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that's to some extent why, I use authentic language in my music now, whether I'm cursing or not. But, it's definitely at a substantially less of a clip than my speaking voice or the language that I use in regular conversation. That's for sure. So, like even in all of these style-free episodes, I don't think I've cursed once. But turn the mic off and just me in regular conversation, with anyone, and I'm just going to be me. And so that intentionality was definitely in play whenever I started writing my own rhymes, where I was actually thinking about, well, who do I want listening to my music and what do I want them to get from it? Where it's not like I'm just going to not curse in all of these, but, especially whenever I first started really writing rhymes, it was probably around my junior or senior year of high school, where I really started to put together up until that point, I was just rapping along with every other song and looking up the lyrics online and then learning all the lyrics so that every time, a song would come on or I'd be at a party or whatever, like I already know all the lyrics and everything like that. And people are like, how did you know that? I was like, well, one, because I also wanted to learn what these rappers were talking about. But most importantly, I wanted to learn how they were rapping and how they would create cadence out of words on a page. Because I'd look up these lyrics, and if you just look up any song's lyrics without knowing the song, you can read through it but not have any understanding of what the cadence is and how it flows. And so I'll be blown away by how these rappers would design and craft their flows. And so that's why I would look up their lyrics so much and then try to learn them as best as I could. And so that didn't start getting spit out onto paper with my own thoughts and ideas until I was like 17, 18.
So what was it about? Let's go through some of those artists that you were listening to, and perhaps you could talk about the way in which they approach, song structure, lyrics, cadence, and so forth, rhythms that perhaps in some way informs you. I know you have some music that's coming up that specifically deals with old school. So could you talk a little bit about, let's start with KRS-One, for example.
So KRS-One, I would say both KRS-One and Chuck D, whenever I first started listening to them, it was the message that they had in their music. It wasn't really about how they were rapping and the cadence or the flow or the style in which they were rapping. It was about the lyrics. With Rakim, it was about how he rhymed and the technicality of these rhyme structures that he was putting together, where I was like, man, like, how many rhymes how many words that rhyme can you fit into one bar, let alone song? I was like, this is incredible. So I was blown away by his technicality, and I was really impressed by KRS-One and Chuck D's message and the boldness that they spoke about stuff, whether it was like, you must learn or fight the power. And, and especially as a kid learning about, the civil rights movement and all those major figures like Malcolm, Martin, and Medgar and all these folks, I wasn't seeing anybody grabbing a mic and doing that except for Jesse Jackson, really, as a little kid. And so Jesse also had his pros and cons that were being highlighted a lot at the time too. And so it didn't have the same sort of impact, at least to me as a little kid, than I had seen these images of Malcolm and Martin having back in the 60s. And so I definitely appreciated and valued Jesse. And we got to meet Jesse when I was little too.
You were little. In fact, he held your hand.
Yeah.
You guys were walking across the quad at one of the local colleges.
Wow. Yeah. I vaguely remember that. I just remember like he patted me on the head and was like, hold my hand.
I think that was at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah. And so like that was pretty much the only like major Black figure to my consciousness or understanding as a little kid, until I was hearing KRS and Chuck D talking about all of this positive and powerful Black experience. And so yeah, so those were the big three. And then I mentioned Will Smith before, just because of the entertainment and the presence that he had and the fun and the levity that he brought to it all too. And so all of those individuals are definitely, as I sit here now and reflect, they're definitely manifested in my music today. For now, sure.
You left one person out though that I remember that you also used to enjoy from California. MC Hammer.
Oh yeah. yeah. That was huge. I don't know. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that, yeah.
And Hammer also, was huge.
And that's the thing. That also goes to show you, at least for me, what really resonated over time. Like, so like the Hammers and the Will Smiths, like as a kid, I loved them because of just that energy and that positivity. And Hammer was also tapping into those who came before him, where you'd see he brought the that superimposed James Brown into that one video, or in the what was it, the Too Legit to Quit video, where it's like where James Brown is in that
James
too,
Brown
and
is in it.
And then there's somebody who's supposed to be Michael Jackson wearing the glove, and and so the opportunity that watching MC Hammer provided for me was like, yeah, you got to acknowledge and pay respect to those who influenced you and came before you.
Yes.
And so you mentioned my song Old School. Like that's predominantly the reason why I even made that song, was to give very subtle and lyrical acknowledgments to various old school rappers, but also just the old school style of that and the flow I was using, or like the way I made that beat was reflective of an old KMD song. KMD was the group that MF Doom used to be a part of before he changed his name to MF Doom. The beat was based off that.
But the thing also is that I wanted to also acknowledge the fact that you've also grown up with an understanding and the importance of history, of historical context.
Yeah.
And how the past does inform the present, just as what we do now will inform the future. So I think that that's been very clear from the beginning, that it's looking to the past, it's taking the lessons, the important values of the past, carrying it forward, into the future. Now, one other person that I want to acknowledge, who I remember was also very important, DMX.
Yeah, but that was when I became more of a teenager.
Yes, and I think 50 Cent to some extent.
Yeah, well, so 50 goes back to more of, the entertainment aspect of it. I mean, DMX and 50 Cent, I became aware of them both when I was around 13, 14. DMX's first two albums dropped when I was 13. And I first heard of 50 Cent, I know I was 15, because it was Power of the Dollar, because he did How to Rob. And I was like, yo, this guy is crazy. Like he's talking about how to rob all of these other rappers and entertainers that are like that I know of. And I was like, yo, this is hilarious. Like this is wild. And so like that boldness and that creativity and that sense of humor
Mm-hmm.
really made 50 Cent stick out to me. And then I honestly, then I forgot about him up
Mm-hmm.
until he ends up signing with Dr. Dre and Eminem, and Get Rich or Die Trying comes out, Wanksta comes out. Uh, it was because of the 8 Mile soundtrack. That's whenever I was like, oh, that's right, 50 Cent. I forgot about
Mm-hmm.
him. But DMX was way more influential on me as a teenager. I
What
would
was
probably
it
say,
about him?
so it was DMX and Jay-Z were probably the two biggest influences on me as a rapper as a teenager, and third would probably be Nas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so DMX, I mean, one, he was the first rapper. So like I definitely liked the Locks when I was younger, but again, I was like 11, 12 whenever they were really coming out, and I knew that they were from Yonkers, but
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't really listened to their music as much as I listened to DMX when he first came out. And knowing Mom is from Yonkers and hearing this guy from Yonkers talk about these neighborhoods that Mom and her brothers and sisters ran through and grew up in, I was like, wow, like this is wild. Like I know Mom has told me some of these stories before, but hearing somebody who was born 15 years later than her and talking about what their experience was in some of these same neighborhoods, I was like, it really stuck out to me. And then learning more about his story of child abuse and the ways in which he was victimized as a kid through people in his family as well as the system, the judicial system and the penal system. It was just the rawness and the honesty and the desire for forgiveness that he had in his music. I was like, this man is rare.
Mm-hmm.
And then his lyrical ability was awesome. And then the way in which he delivered his rhymes was one of a kind. I mean, nobody was bringing that much gristle into. I mean, you had folks like Sticky Fingers and
Oh
all these
yeah,
other folks.
Onyx. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, with these kind of like raspy voices and all that stuff. But when DMX stepped up, that was
Mm.
like he took that, and especially then whenever he gets to the dog barks and the growls and all. So
Yeah.
like I mean, yeah, DMX was definitely very influential because of his storytelling and his honesty and his vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And Jay-Z, it was a few years before I heard of DMX where I first really became aware of Jay-Z. It was for the music video for Foxy Brown's
Foxy
"I'll
Brown.
Be."
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because he was the first rapper I saw that was wearing a suit with glasses.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
as a kid, I was getting made fun of so much for my glasses and all this other stuff where I was like, man, like, this sucks, And then I end up seeing Jay-Z on screen rapping with this smooth, suave flow, and he's got glasses and is wearing a full suit that was, I'm sure it was probably like Armani or something like that. I was like, yeah. I was like, this dude, who is this? Like, I gotta figure out who this is because that is awesome.
Yeah.
And so,
I'll be.
yeah, so that song drops, and then I go back and I recognize and realize that I was like, oh wait, he's on the Space Jam soundtrack. He's the one that did that song. And then I look up, because I'm looking through all of the liner notes and for every album and everything ever, and I realize, oh, he wrote the verse for Bugs Bunny because it says S. Carter on. I was like, this is crazy. I'm 11 years old realizing this stuff, and I was like, man, this guy is incredible. Like I didn't know about the reality of his background or anything like that. I was just going off of what I was seeing and was like, and just felt so much of an identity and a connection where it was like, you can be in a 3-piece suit with glasses and rap this one way, but then at the same time write cool and funny and humorous lines as Bugs Bunny for Space Jam. I was like, it was so cool to me.
Wow.
Because as a kid, I was also like really interested in acting and animation and voice acting and all this stuff, which I definitely still have an interest in today.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was really, really, really moving for me. And then
Plus,
lastly,
you were a big MJ fan too.
yeah,
So him in the mix, you know?
Yeah, Michael Jackson was always floating throughout the mix up until his passing, really.
No, no, no.
Oh, you're thinking, well, I mean,
Michael Jordan.
Both MJs, yeah. Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan, they were both major influences for sure throughout that entire time period. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, when I see the Al B video, Jordan is just coming back for his fourth championship at that point. You know, like all of this can be time stamped with various milestones of both MJ's careers for sure.
And when you saw both MJs in that Michael Jackson video
For Jam in 1991, yeah. Yep, absolutely. And Heavy D was rapping in that too, where
That's right.
my favorite part of that song was the breakdown right into Heavy D's rap and then him doing his thing. So yeah, there was just it's a lot of right. But yeah, so like the last person though of that era though was Nas. You know, when I was a teenager, I mean, because he had done Illmatic back in '94, and back in '94, I was clearly being censored in certain ways. So it wasn't until I Am and Nostradamus, like both of those albums, where I was able to have a little more autonomy in the music I was listening to, that I could appreciate him more. And so, yeah, moving to Clifton Park, in addition to finally crossing that threshold into being a teenager, also gave me an opportunity to finally have friends who were listening to the same music as me. Yes. And they weren't even, you know, some of them were of the same racial background as me, you know, as, being Black or Latinx, but you know, it was white kids, Asian kids, Palestinian kids, all listening to the same music that I was into. You know, DMX, Jay-Z, Wu-Tang Clan, Nas. We were all listening to it together. And that's when I was like, yeah, this is the energy and the feeling that I've wanted my entire life. And I was only 13 at that point.
And you were also into Shaq, too. Shaq Diesel.
Right? Well, again, that goes back to entertainment. Like yeah, it's like, you know, the biggest basketball, like literally the biggest, you know, 7 foot whatever, besides Michael Jordan. Like Shaq had to have been the second most popular basketball player at the time. You know, whenever he dropped Shaq Diesel, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna listen to this. And then Shaq wasn't rapping bad at all on that album. So, you know, a shout out to him too, because he definitely held it down and held his own. Where you know, it was him and Foosh Nickens rapping all over that album.
Nickens, that's right.
Yeah. And so that helped to inform me as well too. But but similarly to, you know, Will Smith or MC Hammer, it was more the entertainment value that I got from that.
If you were to think of the common denominator, you know, among these influences, and, you know, of course, we can also talk about, you know, contemporary people, you know, the Kendrick Lamars and J. Cole's, and, you know, and on and on. You know, is there a common denominator among all of those artists that you've spoken of, or any that are contemporary that you could also speak to, that you can relate to in the sense that you can also connect them with the basic tenets of hip hop culture, you know, to which you ascribe?
Yeah, that's a deep and good question. So for those who don't know, the tenets of hip hop culture are peace, unity, love, and having fun, expressed through emceeing, DJing, breaking, graffiti, and all held together with the knowledge. And so for me, I mean, the through line of KRS-One, Chuck D, Rakim, Jay-Z, Nas, DMX, you know, any of those folks, it's the authenticity that is expressed through the music. Whether or not all the stories are true, it's the authenticity with which they're expressed, I think, is the connecting point. Because each and every one of them, whether it's those folks or, like you had mentioned, Kendrick Lamar or J. Cole or anybody like that, it all boils down to authenticity. And also, I would say, how much respect and reverence you have for the craft. Because so many people have put out music, but the ones that last and the ones that seem to have the staying power are really the ones that have put in the time and the effort and the quality of buy-in from themselves as well as whatever team or teams that they're working with,
Mm-hmm.
that it really gives it a longevity. I mean, the quality of music that Motown was cranking out is eternal. The quality of music that Quincy Jones has produced, whether it's Burt Bacharach to Michael Jackson,
Mm-hmm.
is timeless. You know, the quality of music that, folks today like Pharrell and Kanye and all these folks are putting together are timeless. You
And
know,
that's a very important point that you just made in terms of use like teamwork.
yeah,
It's not just one person doing it by themselves,
right.
but it's a collective experience where someone might have a seed of an idea or general point of focus, but how you work together can create something that even transcends that individual vision into something much larger.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your music. Now you've talked about some of the influences, some of the people that have helped to shape your appreciation for flow and cadence and so forth. What was the first video that you produced, that you actually produced?
The first music video I ever made or put together was for a song called Rise That Nine Ether. I made that one in 2009, and it might still be available somewhere on YouTube, but yeah, it's definitely
What was going on at that time, and what informed the development of that particular music and video?
well, I created the song my senior year of college in 2007 is when I made the beat and I wrote the lyrics between 2007 and 2008. And there was just a lot of soul searching and self reflection that was going on at that time. I mean, in addition to graduating college in the middle of the US financial crisis, and trying to figure out what I wanted to do as a career, because the only thing I had really studied consistently throughout college and graduated with the degree through was studying hip hop culture and how it was being used in various cultures around the world, and just funneled that through an anthropology degree. So I didn't really know what I was going to be doing for a profession at that point. I didn't know what the world had to offer really, for me, leaving the doors of F&M and graduating. So there was just a lot of soul searching as far as trying to really get a thorough understanding of who I am and where I come from, and the depth to which I can understand the importance and the legacy of us as Black people. And so the title Rise That Nine Ether, I was at the time watching a whole lot of Afrocentric videos and reading various authors about, the Pan-African diaspora, and then getting into learning about folks like Dr. Malachi York. And I'm definitely not putting him on a pedestal, especially considering everything that he was accused of and found guilty of in his life. But it was through listening to some of his speeches where he was talking about people of African descent having their hair being of that nine ether, nine being the pinnacle number, and that's why our hair curls in that sort of nine pattern. It looks like the number nine, and how much of a connection that we have to the grandness of life in the universe. And so that concept really stuck out to me, not the person and what he was doing, but just that concept. And that's what I ended up building and creating that song around. I was living in New York at the time, and decided to film it in New York and try to get as much symbolism of various things that I felt could be relevant, as possible. So I was just trying to fill the video with as much symbolism as I could. But yeah, it was definitely early and rough video in comparison to the quality of things that I've been putting out more lately. But that also goes to the point that you made earlier about teamwork.
Mm.
and building a team and collaborating with other folks. I mean, so much of my journey musically has been, an army of one, especially really being independent. Like I put out my first album, I produced all the music and I wrote all of the lyrics, and the only feature was from my friend Dave. And
That's right. This was the beginning of JusListen Entertainment, right?
yeah,
That
yeah.
you both started.
Yep, yeah, we started it together in 2005 in our dorm room, or as actually the suite of his dorm room back at F&M, and then yeah, by 2008, I had already moved to New York by that point. He was still living in Lancaster before then moving to Alaska temporarily, and so that distance also then necessitated a independence, for
Mm.
myself, where I realized like, all right, looks like I'm gonna have to do it on my own until I find and build a whole other team. But
Mm.
um,
Well, at some point when you did move to New York, you eventually connected up with an organization that was created by Russell Simmons. In other words, you
mhm.
were finding a way to get closer to the music business in a different way.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. I started working at Global Grind, and yeah, I loved that job. I loved my role. I loved the position of the work I was doing, and
what were you doing in
unfortunately,
there again?
well, so I was the content curator, the junior content curator for the website, where all of the headlines and various articles and all of the site was essentially being curated by myself and Larry Blackspot Hester, and
Wow. What was the value of that experience for you, looking back?
it showed me how fleeting things can be.
What do you mean?
Global Grind as an institution still exists,
Right.
but the concept and the heart and the purpose of Global Grind hasn't existed in over a decade.
Mm.
So the company was founded, within a year of my arrival as one of the first interns, and the purpose was to be the hip hop Huffington Post, where you're getting hip hop perspectives with fresh articles and insights into everything that's going on in the world on a daily basis, similar to what the Huffington Post was and is.
Mm-hmm.
And it soon after became a content aggregator where you're sourcing your content from other websites and other platforms and having those who are part of the Global Grind platform upvote whatever they want to see. So the more relevant or more popular things end up making it toward the tops of the pages, and the less relevant or less voted things, remain toward the bottom. And then it shifted from that to then focusing for a while predominantly on a lot of celebrity gossip. And so during that whole time, there was a lot of financial hiccups that happened throughout the organization and caused a lot of folks to be let go.
Mm.
And, you know,
Yeah.
that's essentially what happened with that. Ultimately, it still exists and it's still doing their thing, but it's only a shell of the idea that
Mm.
it was originally conceived from. And
Mm.
that's what I bought into, even being
Mm.
there, was that original concept and idea. And yeah, I loved everybody that I worked with. I loved the job. And actually, one of my fellow interns, we started there at the same time, but um, he just recently passed away, Ant Reynolds. So definitely
Oh,
want to give a
sorry.
shout out to him and
Mm.
condolences to his family. But
Mm.
yeah, it was a real family environment that we had there for sure. And it gave me an opportunity to also connect and build professional and then personal relationships with several folks on the staff who've now gone on to do incredible things with their careers. Like Ant Morgan is currently doing phenomenal things, leading various teams over at Masterclass. And Larry Hester is, in addition to being an awesome dad, continuing to just be Black Spot and be his awesome self. Kim Osorio is continuing to produce and lead various projects that folks are tapped into and tuned into every day, whether it's on TV or even her previous work at the Source. And so
Mm.
there was, Quelly Wright, and the list goes on. Gerard Brewster, the list just keeps going on. Daytwan Thomas, all these folks were there. Navarro Wright, the opportunities and the connections. And shout out to Blogzilla too, or that used to be his nickname at least. But yeah,
Wow.
Lamar Valentine. Yeah, so many people were all part of that team, and yeah, things
So,
happen.
yeah, no, this is I think important. The lessons that come out of those kind of experiences, and I wanted to also ask you about the let's see, the next video you did. There's one where you have, I think your friend Ashton is in that video, and you're on the subway train, and you've got graffiti.
Yeah, so a few years later, I'd done some videos in between, but they weren't it was me doing the best that I could with what I had, and so
Mm-hmm.
the opportunity to really make an actual music video with proper equipment definitely came in 2012. So I was able to do a 12-week workshop and certificate program at New York Film Academy, and that was funded through my master's program in international peace and conflict resolution at Arcadia University. And the 12 weeks that I spent in New York at New York Film Academy gave me the knowledge and the skills to create documentary films and music videos.
Mm-hmm.
And that was everything that I was intending on being my thesis for my master's program, which is why they sent me there. And so I made my first official music video for a song called Follow Me Now. And yeah, some of my friends from F&M are in that video, like Ashton and Paul Fields and Lorenzo Daughtry Chambers. And yeah, it was directed by me, but the videography was done by Fatima Sulkantanova, as well as some of my other classmates at New York Film Academy. They were really, really helpful in making that happen. And so that was my first opportunity to not just shoot a video with proper equipment, but then also learning how to edit it and pace the shots and add the audio underneath, and then do what I needed to do to make sure everything was EQ'd properly. And all of that I learned through that experience.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I really like that video. And,
Thanks.
yeah, and you're right. I mean, all of those experiences, Film Academy, and just your interaction with other people who are creatives and so forth. Again, it goes back to this idea about a team effort.
Mm-hmm.
So subsequent to that, there were some other developments that took place and films and things that you worked on. But there's something particularly remarkable about some of the things that have developed now through your work with a filmmaker named Xavier.
Yeah, Xavier Luciano.
Yes. And the films that you've done, from Black Lives Matter, which is really it's very poetic. It's a work of art unto itself in terms of the poetry, the use of black and white and so forth.
Thanks.
You talked before about the pacing and the sequencing and the editing. Let me ask you about your process as a creative. What comes first? Is it the music? Is it the lyrics? And then at a certain point, when you decide to make a film about this, how do you go about working with the director, or, in terms of sequencing it in a way that either supports the lyrics, counteracts the lyrics to create some kind of counterpoint, or follows the pacing of the lyrics in a certain way that follows a certain flow? Can you talk a little bit about the first starting out with which comes first?
Yeah, so it used to be the lyrics came first and then the music. But once I started creating and producing the music myself, instead of just writing rhymes to whatever popular beats were available, then the music informed the lyrics. So now my process is I just make a ton of beats, and I'll just make beats and all different ideas. And then the strongest ideas get flushed out into having the sequence of a song, whether the hook is going to start first or the verse is going to start at the beginning. And I'll sequence out the strongest ones. And then from there, I just listen to them on repeat and identify what feeling they're making me feel. And then from those feelings, what does that make me think? And then I start to craft the idea and the concepts of the songs. And I think that process has been a lot stronger for me as a creative, because like my lyrics could apply to a lot of beats and a lot of music, but only certain music can enhance lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
And so making the music first and putting that together as thoroughly as I can before crafting the lyrics. And then I put all the lyrics together, and then I go to the studio and work with my engineer. Shout out to Phil Pierce. And we were just working in the studio last night too. But we then go into the studio and I'll record my verses over top of the beat, and we'll first do like a full run through and just unedited take. And then depending upon the quality of that one, we might go through and break it up by verse or even punch it by certain lines, depending upon the complexity of the flow. And then we'll listen back to it and then figure out what may or may not be needed to add or subtracted from the song musically. And then after that, it's just a whole lot of going back and forth and just making the tweaks and adjustments, and then the song's done.
Well, let me ask you, generally, what would you say, where would you say you get a lot of your themes or ideas for what you're going to actually be writing about?
It comes from the sound of the music, because the ideas and the themes switch consistently.
Let's take a song like We Outside.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Could you talk about the process, sort of unpack the way that came about?
So shout out to my best friend, again, Ashton Williams. We were over at his place in Brooklyn, and he was saying, yo, you got to make a song because it's the pandemic and everybody's got to get outside. It's got to be called We Outside. You got to make a song called We Outside. And that was the original impetus for why I decided to create that song. And then lyrically, the song came about because of how the guitar licks in the song went. So because the guitar licks were like, and then the song made me feel like the song feels just musically very well. I was very intentional about it. I tried to balance so the way the song feels in the verse feels compressed, and there's a heavy bass, and it feels almost like you're kind of inside. And then when the hook shows up, there's a brightness. It's a bit lighter. The 808 switches and shifts to a different type of drum and bass pattern. And there's also we added some voices of just people outside in the park, and the transitions, I used the rain stick and shifted so that it kind of had this weird little ethereal sounding, cosmic shift from we've been inside for way too long to we outside everywhere we go, which is following and mimicking the way the guitar lick goes.
Yes.
And so that's how the song and the idea of it really got built, was how the music made me feel, which was, outside and then, going from this place of compression to expansion, and then allowing the melody and the hook to ride along with the music itself.
It's interesting when there's a certain part of the song when you hear this little, boom, boom,
yeah,
and it reminded me of the sound of being inside compressed in a submarine,
yeah
underwater, like in the Nautilus or something, and then suddenly you surface, and you outside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that rain stick sound kind of feels like the water coming off of you a bit as you're catching that breath of fresh air. Yeah,
song like Hope, I got hope. It's and the insistence of it. It matches that sense of urgency, which is different than a song like We Outside.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting how I don't know if you actually think of, because we were talking before about being able to tell a story. Storytelling runs through all of this.
Yeah.
How you paint a picture. Do you see sometimes the image in your mind's eye of what this is going to look like, what the scene is going to look like, or or does that come about because you're talking with maybe the director or something, or do you have a certain vision?
You're talking about the music video?
The videos, yeah, yeah, based on the lyrics.
Yeah, so the lyrics definitely inform the video. So like you mentioned like BLM and the music video for that song. I was listening to the music and was thinking about like, all right, how can this be expressed visually? And my first thought was of a dancer dancing solo with a spotlight over top of him, and he's in black and white, and it's kind of in an industrial space where, you know, every foot movement you might see some dust kick up or a little bit and like little flecks of it and stuff like that. And then juxtaposing that with myself in a similar, you know, black and white under the spotlight, and I'm rapping to the camera. And that was my original concept for it. And then I hit up Xavier and gave him just the outline and the concept of the ideas of having a dancer and the type of shot and everything like that. And we ended up not doing it outside. We shot it at Rec Philly in one of the studio spaces inside of Rec Philly, which is just a massive creative hub for, you know, folks in Philadelphia who are just musically or artistically or, you know, any type of creativity, or if you're inclined, you know, in any creative realm, Rec Philly is an open space for you. And so we filmed it in there because we're able to just isolate and manipulate the space better for what you end up seeing in the final product. And then through my conversations with Xavier, you know, he was like, well, I have some other dancers, you know, that I think could really be, you know, part of this project and, you know, show the diversity of Black people and the Black experience. And I was like, I love that idea. And so he brought some of his friends through, and they were all part of the video as well. And then both Xavier and I were actively filming the BLM protests that were happening in Philly that then started to shift into riots. And so we incorporated a lot of that footage into the song and to the video as well because of its relevancy. You know, we're in the midst of all of this social stuff going on in the world. Like, how can we also have some real and authentic footage of the people protesting against police violence and injustice against Black lives within the video? And so, yeah, it was a mix of that and just leaning on each other's ideas and ways that we could bring more folks into the fold that brought it to fruition.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I was wondering if the use of black and white was in some level, you know, metaphor, you know, for this kind of white engagement. You know,
I hadn't thought about that before. You know, so like that video's been out for like a year, and I have not thought about that before. And yeah, that's a cool connection. The only reason why, the main reason why I thought of black and white for the video is because of, and the entire video is not black and white, but the majority of it is.
Yeah.
But was because it just seemed cool. I think I was actually inspired by a dance video that Xavier had done several years prior. And it just happened to be posted on his Instagram, where I think he was dancing solo under a spotlight and I don't know if it was black and white or not, but it was definitely cool enough that I was like, this is inspiring. So,
you know, it's interesting you should mention that, because I remember when, as you were saying that, I was thinking about that part of the Jam video where Michael is dancing by himself. I think with Michael to a certain extent, but by himself, you know, under
both MJs end up out there.
A silhouette, right? Yeah. And then I was thinking about the Flavor in Your Ear, you know, where he's in the Hall of Science, you know, and the lights are coming down here.
Yeah.
You know, turn your body into antimatter, you know?
Yep. And so, like, it's funny you bring all that stuff up too, because I definitely believe that a lot of my visual artistry and my musical artistry has subconscious information from what I absorbed as a kid into it. So, for example, I'm in the process of recording my next song on my next album. It's called Freshest Professor. And one of the lines I say, I'm rocking from South right up to 25th. which, I'm rocking from South Street right up to 125th Street in Harlem.
Mm-hmm.
Acknowledging my girlfriend lives on South Street, so I'm always on South Street. And then I've got friends and connects all the way up to Harlem and 125th Street because I used to work in Harlem and our main site was on 125th Street.
That's right.
And so I wrote that with that intention, yet I'm driving around in the car
Just
listening to
no,
it's funny. I'm actually listening to a Will Smith playlist just because, he smacked Chris Rock. And so I'm like, I haven't listened to Will Smith in a very long time. Let me press play on it. And the first song is Getting Jiggy with It. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, in that song, he says, rock from South Street to 125th.
That's right.
I was like, what? What? I have not listened to Getting Jiggy with It in 20 years plus. And yet I have a line that says rocking from South right up to 25th. And he said rock from South Street to 125th.
Yes. They say there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
I mean, so we draw inspiration from a variety of sources and we formulate it within our own consciousness, in a way, and then put it out there. It says what we need it to say in that moment. I think it's real inspiration. That's what I think it is. And we use bits and pieces in order to make it work, to say what we need to say.
Yeah.
There's so much more to say. I know we're kind of bumping up against the time here.
It's all good.
But now we're looking at the way in which you work together with different artists. It's a collaborative thing. It reminds me a little bit of the jazz experience, where different musicians, you have a basic concept, but everybody brings in their input into the mix to make it something greater than the individual parts.
Yeah.
You had an opportunity to work with jazz musicians. Could you talk about that and what it means to you, particularly in light of the fact that, not just who you were rapping about or what the project was about, but also in light of people like Rakim and maybe even Tribe Called Quest and others, Guru, who've been inspired by jazz itself. Could you talk a little bit about where you see jazz and hip hop in relationship to one another?
Yeah, I've definitely had the fortunate opportunity to work with the Philadelphia Jazz Project on several collaborations. It really gave me an opportunity to work with, jazz musicians like Pedro Rodriguez and Jupiter Blue and Kevin Obatala, it's folks who, are standalone, high caliber musicians in their own right, but, also have significant, connections and members of, the Sun Ra Orchestra and, other experiences that they've had where I'm just fortunate to be able to connect with them. And I think that the way in which jazz has an opportunity today to continue to intersect with hip hop, I mean, it's tremendous. I think that, I just think that there's a lot of opportunity. I don't know if it's happening as much as I would
Kendrick
like to.
has done some things with
Kendrick, and it's like everything that Kendrick is doing definitely has a lot of, especially with the To Pimp a Butterfly album. Whenever you're working with Robert Glasper and Kamasi Washington, jazz is going to heavily inform the sonic output of your work. But that's one album in Kendrick's catalog, but yet that album was so quality and so impactful that it feels like it has become an umbrella of Kendrick's catalog when it's really just one facet of it. And so that's what I mean as far as I can't say anything right now beyond excitement for an opportunity for it to continue to grow, because besides that album from Kendrick or the work that Bad Bad Not Good has done with, artists like Ghostface Killah, I'm hard pressed to really see substantial ways that folks are bringing jazz along in the more mainstream sound of hip hop right now. If anything, it shows up in the jazz side more than it does on the hip hop side, where you have more hip hop artists, the hip hop artists who are inclined to work with jazz artists it's an incredible amount of people that, you know, Terrace Martin and Robert Glasper and Kamasi Washington have worked with, whether or not it's just that one project they did with the dinner party or everything that they do independently, you know, from one another. There's been a lot of overlap in those ways, or even the best example might honestly be live music, where you have hip hop artists needing a backing band, and you get folks like Dante Winslow and Adam Blackstone running the band, where, you know, they did all the music for the Super Bowl halftime show just this past Super Bowl. They just did the music for the Oscars.
Yes, that's right. There is a kind of coming together. Do you think there'll ever come a time where music and Black culture will go beyond certain categories? I guess you could say that about music in general.
Yeah, it already has. It's well beyond certain categories for sure. Like categories are just really easy markers.
Yeah, but do you think that that's a reflection then of how the music industry has changed in terms of record companies and so forth, that there's more of an independent entrepreneurial component to getting the music out there that's maybe not as controlled in certain ways?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. The opportunity that artists have had to just put themselves out on their own platforms and have sustainable careers in that has definitely helped to, however you want to phrase it, whether it's break down or blend genres. It's created that opportunity because people are able to be more free in their own creative expression. Then it makes the listener challenge how they've conceptualized genre and music, where you have arguments now about, is Doja Cat a rapper? It's like, well, yeah, she raps, so of course she's a rapper. Just because she doesn't rap on every song doesn't mean that she's not a rapper. Like Drake doesn't rap on every song, yet we consider him a rapper. So what's going on? So like, there's a million different genres any one artist could be placed in depending upon the song that they put out. But it'll either be defined by the artist or their label. And if the artist has more autonomy, then those borders are really meaningless anyway.
So what are your thoughts about the categories and things that exist to various extent in Black culture, musically speaking? Let's take in rap. So you have different kinds of rap as they're identified, over the years. They, use gangster rap, pop rap, or mumble rap, or, the list goes on and on and on. How much of that is just developed because how the artists self-identify what they do? Or is that put upon them outside the culture itself?
I would say the vast majority of the time it's put upon them by the public. For sure. Whether that public is the industry or the listener or the radio station or whatever the case may be, I would say the majority of the time it's definitely the label is placed by an external source.
Oh, okay.
So like for myself, I just consider myself a hip hop artist. Like I rap, I produce, I write, I develop the concepts, I direct and edit these videos. Like there's multifacetedness to myself as an artist. And so I'm not just gonna like people have tried to label me as, oh, you're a backpack rapper or a conscious rapper or a positive rapper. But like, all right, well, one, is there a difference in any of those three? And two, could I be all of that? Like it's like, come on, like what are we even doing here? Like, like saying what type of rapper I am. I'm a rapper.
Yeah.
And if you connect with it, you connect with it. If you don't, you don't. But I think that genres also help make it easier for folks to define themselves and for the public to define them as well. Because I could also just as easily say, well, I'm not a trap artist. I'm not a gangster rapper. Like I'm not a coke rapper like Pusha T. I rap about my thoughts, my experiences, and my perspectives. That's it. Yeah. And so however you want to define that is ultimately how you're choosing to define me. And me as a person and the experiences that I've had in my life and in my profession are so diverse and so unique that I honestly can't be defined. What other rapper do you know had an upbringing where they were raised by two college educated parents, but grew up racially isolated from their peers, except for when they were in an institution of worship, and then didn't have peers who were connecting with the same artistic output that they had, and then they grow up through this sense of isolation and end up getting a college degree, a master's degree, and is pursuing a doctorate degree, all while being a program director at an international nonprofit organization and teaching courses at a university, while also still putting out music and music videos consistently. Like, it's enough of a diversity of experiences where it's like, okay, how do you define or box that person into one label or category? You can't. And so if it's easier for you to say that I'm a conscious rapper or whatever type of rapper you want to label me as, fine, whatever works for you. But that is going to have no effect or impact on my self-perception or the type of artistry that I continue to create.
I feel that. That was beautifully stated.
Thanks.
Well, let me ask you this then, just to round it out. Then, looking back, what would you like to say about your career as an artist, and looking ahead 10 years ahead, where would you like to be?
It's an interesting question to ask at this point in my life, because 10 years ago, if you had asked me the same questions, the responses that I had compared to where I am today would be out of alignment emotionally. Where, 10 years ago, I was 27. And at 27, I was actively comparing my age and my recognition to other artists that have inspired me. And all of the artists that have inspired me were very successful as rappers and as musicians by the time they turned age 27. So at 37 now, I'm being asked this question, and 10 years from now, I'll be 47. So my 27-year-old response now would be, at 47, if I still haven't gotten X amount of recognition for my music, then I'm a failure. That's my 27-year-old response. When I was asked that question then. If at 37 I don't have this certain level of recognition, man, I failed. But here at 37, I don't have that level of recognition that I hoped for myself at 27. But I have the experiences and the adventures and the opportunities that I could have never imagined I would have ever had back when I was 27. Like, I'm not going to sit here and list all of the incredible things that have happened for me in my life in the last 10 years. One, because my ego just doesn't sit well to do that and talk about myself in that way. But two, because it's so extensive. And so if I, talked to my 27-year-old self and said, yo, this is where you're sitting at 37, my 27-year-old self might be like, oh man, why couldn't I do that? Why couldn't I be where you are at 32 rather than 37? It's like, yo, would you put it this way? Forget the age. Would you be happy? And the answer would be yes. And so right now at 37, professionally and personally, I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life,
mm,
for
mm,
sure.
mm,
With my family, with my friends, with my relationship, with my career, and the various professions I have within my career,
mm,
whether it's running this nonprofit or teaching or putting together this music, all of it, I'm so happy with. I'm so happy to the point where I struggle with anything changing
mm,
right now
mhm,
because it's going so well.
mhm, mhm,
But change is inevitable.
mhm,
And so knowing that 10 years from now, there'll be 10 years of change between now and when I'm 47, the things that I would want to see for myself
mm,
is really just to be as happy, if not more happy than I am right now.
mm,
And however that manifests itself, whether it's one day finally having a song that's on the Billboard Hot 100,
mm,
or one day, finally having a placement in a commercial, or because like those types of things, like that would be awesome. Those are certain things that I have yet to have in my career. 10 years ago, if you had told me that I was going to perform at the Apollo Theater, I would have been like, "What? That's incredible!" And here I am now, 5 years removed from performing at the Apollo Theater,
mm.
and everything that has built into, I'm like, yeah, like absolutely, yeah. My name is signed on that wall of legends too.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
I did that.
Yeah.
Like, and so there's just a lot of things that I've done that if you had told me, even forget 10 years ago, if you had told me as a kid that like first of all, as a kid, I did envision this. I was like, one day I'm gonna perform on the Apollo Theater stage. I didn't know
Mm,
how, I didn't know when, and I didn't know what the context would be. But
mhm,
sure enough,
mm,
at 32,
mhm.
I get the opportunity to perform in front of a sold out audience at the Apollo Theater and get a rousing ovation.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Yes.
you know, I'm just, now continuing to build on these experiences.
Mhm,
And so that's what I hope for at 47, is really just to continue to have an evolved perspective on the incredible things that have happened in my life.
So what those are very powerful statements. What would you say to the younger Steve Tyson aspiring? And what would you tell any other aspiring person who wants to, let's say, emulates you or emulates, some of the other folks that you've mentioned perhaps, and are thinking about going into music, in this way, whether it's rap or hip hop or dancing or whatever genre, what advice would you give them as they move forward, as they're looking ahead, to your younger self and then also to others who are younger looking ahead?
The advice would be the same for both. And it would be to free yourself from doubt. And I think that the ways in which that's manifested itself for me is because throughout my 20s, I was getting so much feedback negatively about the message and the purpose that I was putting into my music,
Mm,
where
mm,
essentially everybody was just like, don't rap about what you rap about. Make some throwaway, song that could just be popular, and just rap about what everybody else is rapping about, just so you can get your foot in the door and get your foot in the door. And I was so struck by that because I never wanted to, and still don't ever want to, I don't want to ever compromise my integrity for an opportunity.
mhm,
And as a result of that, I would step into spaces or not even attempt to step into spaces because I doubted how people would receive me or my music. And I feel like that slowed unintentionally, but the effects are still the same, it ended up slowing my development as an artist, where I was more timid. Like, even though I'm still going to the New Yorican Poets Cafe regularly and performing there at their open mics, shout out to Wise Guy and Gaston. I was going to various clubs and bars in New York and doing these performances and performing in front of, well, New Yorican was definitely a crowd, but in a lot of these other places, I'd be performing for 4, 5, 6, 8 people. And they would appreciate my music, but I was like, but only 8 people are showing up. Maybe what I'm doing or what I'm saying isn't the right thing. And, I would just doubt myself and then not put myself out there as much as I could have. And I think that had an effect on me. And I also think that it's important for, the younger version of me or any artist, who's really trying to get out there to really build a team. And I know that there are a lot of external forces that allow for a team to exist and thrive together. Like, it's not just one person's idea and now everybody's going to come together and it's going to happen. They're like, everybody has something going on in their lives. And so for a lot of these teams or groups or everything, like, there's definitely, in my opinion, something divine that kind of keeps them and brings them together. But for me, it wasn't really until I met Phil, my engineer, in 2015. Philip Pierce. He also goes by the name Six Strings. One of the dopest guitarists, bassists, and all-around engineers and producers you're ever going to meet. That's for sure. And for the last 7 years, like, he's been like my right-hand man whenever it comes to all this music. Like, that was the first building block of my actual real team. Was when I was 32, and and then I finally get the first piece of the team. And then my mentee, turned into friend Tyron Hawkins, or T Hawkins as he goes by, aka Ronnie Arenji. He became the next member of the team. He's very active and consistently putting out his music and working and developing himself as an artist consistently. And that work ethic was critical. And I definitely, want to do everything I can to help support him in his growth. And then Xavier, has become a member of the team as well, with his videography skills and also the ways in which that he's helped bring other people into the fold, bringing other dancers into the music videos or having ideas for different locations or the way shots should be. And then just being an excellent thought partner and a friend too. It feels like I've, in so many instances of my adult life, I've had to, reset my friend group where, now it's like, for a large portion of my adult life, my closest friends were my friends from college. But whenever it comes to building my team for JusListen Entertainment, it's going to be none of them. And that's no shade. It's just the truth. Like, like, I'm not part of any of their business ventures either, because that's not, my skill set. I'm not an added value to that team. And so the team that I've built and am creating now has taken some years to form. And so also then looking forward again too, my hope at 47 is that the team is even more solidified. My hope is that it's, Xavier and Phil still at that point in my life, regardless of where we're all living and what may or may not come from the potential of various life changes like that. But, at the end of the day, it's just my hope that the team can continue to grow, or if it's not them, that it's other folks that I can continue to have a consistent working relationship with that builds things that come to fruition and then have lasting power, like, staying power. Yeah.
Well, I'm certainly convinced, and I might be a little biased, that your consciousness is going to continue to rise and expand, and it's going to manifest itself in all that you do in a positive way, whether it's music, whether it's in producing, whether it's in directing, whether it's in educational, teaching the youth as you are doing and that have been doing all of these years. I think that you offer the world a very much needed antidote to a lot of the negativity that is out there. and also that it will continue to inspire people to find the best in themselves so that their lights can shine just as yours is shining as we speak.
Thanks, Dad. I appreciate that. And yeah, and hopefully I'll have an opportunity to grow all this, and speak things, into existence. Hey, I might be best new artist nominee at the Grammys at 40. you know,
Right, right.
I'm down to
Yeah.
continue to break misconceptions.
Age is just a number.
Exactly.
Well, it's always great being with you, Papo, and I enjoyed this conversation very much.
Likewise, Dad. Love you.
Okay, love you too.